Hi, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you might be listening to this recording. This is Leah Clark. I am Director of Strategy and Planning at Blessing White, a division of GP Strategies. And I'm here today to talk to you about research that we recently conducted to get at what leaders need to be successful both today and in the future. The presentation will walk you through the results of the research of over 1,400 leader responses fielded in the spring of 2018. I'll tee up what we were hoping to better understand that informed our questions and share with you the results of what we heard. At the end, we'll cover just briefly the implications for learning and development. We had a lot of topics we wanted to explore with leaders, but our overall goal was to hear from them what skills they thought they needed to be successful. We were also interested in what mindset shifts they felt they needed to make to be mentally ready to lead or to continue to lead. We were looking to distinguish what made organizations particularly successful from those that were not quite as successful to see what conclusions we could draw about what those leaders did differently. We sliced the data by level of leader and other demographics, and while we won't cover all of that today, we do have several research briefs available on our website so you can see what we learned. And then finally, we wanted to understand where L&D is best served investing their dollars to support leadership development. So with that, let's dig in. We started with the present, and we asked leaders what skills they needed today to be successful. And here's what we heard. Communicating effectively at all levels, coaching and developing the team, developing and executing strategy, and building effective relationships with team members are top of mind. And in these results, we see a lot of what I would refer to as leadership essentials. So core skills that leaders need to be successful, to get the job done. And we know that leaders need to be competent. So they need to do things like develop and execute strategy. They need to follow the specific steps associated with communicating effectively. But what we also know and what we notice in the results is that emphasis on connection skills. So the ability to relate to others, to motivate them, to get them working well together. Again, competence is key, but connection is what really distinguishes leaders. And that balance of competence and connection is really threaded throughout the research. And then, as I mentioned, we looked at what distinguished successful from very successful organizations. And when you look at the bottom to see where they started to diverge, you can see a dynamic playing out that you'll notice in this answer and you'll see throughout the research, and that is this. Successful organizations are focused a little bit more on the here and now, on driving team performance that can deliver results. Very successful organizations, perhaps because they're already successful in the here and now, have a bit of a longer-term view. They are concerned just a little bit more than successful organizations at developing and executing strategy. And throughout the research and throughout the presentation, we'll touch on a couple of places where this particular dynamic played out. But let's keep going and learn a little bit more about what we heard from leaders. We next asked them, what do you need specifically from your organization to be successful? Because we wanted to better understand the backdrop against which leaders do their best work. And here's what we heard. We heard that they need three things from their organization: more effective leaders, more and more effective communication, and clearer strategy. And in looking at these results, we can see a little bit of what Deloitte also found in the research that they did earlier in the year. More effective leaders mirrors what they heard when they indicated that 51% of their respondents ranked C-suite collaboration as most critical. Senior leaders need to get out of their own silos and be successful. And Deloitte coined this term the symphonic C-suite to suggest that leaders need to bring together teams across the organization, each with their own responsibility and contribution, and they need them to work together. This is very much what we believe we saw when our leaders said, I need my leaders to be more effective in order for me to accomplish the results that they need from me and from my team. And then second, more and more effective communication. It's another reoccurring theme of this research, and you'll see the topic come up again. Leaders know they need to be effective communicators to be successful, and they're calling out communication as something that also needs to work well from the executives and within the larger organization that they reside. So communication, time and time again, you'll see as a critical need of leaders, and also, I'll give you a hint to the future, an area where they could use some help. And then finally, clearer strategy is another reoccurring theme here. You'll notice strategy coming up particularly when we're talking about what distinguishes successful and very successful organizations, but strategy also emerges throughout this research as a particular data point and area of need. And when we asked leaders what they needed from their organization to be successful, we also wanted to know, what did they think motivated their employees? So what did they think got their teams, their groups of individuals up and out of bed every morning to accomplish results? And here's what we learned. While collecting a paycheck is important, that personal financial benefit part, meaningful work ranked almost as high as financial benefit, trailing that number by just 3%. And then recognition for work well done ranked third. When you look at this information against Blessing White's career research, there's another consistent message. In previous career research, we asked what criteria an individual would look for in their next job. And interesting work, work-life balance, and meaningful work consistently rose to the top of the list. We looked again here to see what was the difference when we asked leaders of successful and very successful organizations what they believed motivated their employees. And again, we can see a little bit of that near-term versus short-term view playing out in these results. Successful organizations believe that their employees are motivated by creating new things, right here, right now. Very successful organizations looking to the future are considering professional growth and development, a slightly longer-term view, as what is most important to their employees. So with that as a baseline and understanding what leaders needed today to be successful from their organization, what they thought motivated their employees, and what skills were most important, we then wanted to shift their attention to the future and find out from them how those skills might change. Before we did that, we asked them what dynamics they thought would most impact their leadership. And in the results, we saw a trio of shifts. Our leaders ranked how people work, new technology, and changing workforce demographics as the three things that they felt would most impact their leadership. Again, there's some connection back to some of the Deloitte research as well, in that Deloitte also saw a high number of respondents indicating that the way people work is going to significantly change how leaders lead. And it's in things like the decrease in face-to-face meetings and the increase in phone and text messaging, even more social collaboration and online ways of working together and communicating. So the dynamics of how people work and the way technology plays into leadership, something that we're hearing from other industry thought leaders and something we're seeing reflected in our leadership. And then certainly changing workforce demographics, the rise of freelancers, contracted workers, individuals in alternate work arrangements, the fact that baby boomers, as we know, have been leaving different industries in droves, and what is the talent that is going to replace them, or how can we harness the knowledge of those older workers. All of this playing into the way individuals interact with people in their organization, how they relate to them, and the way that they lead. So then we said, well, with the benefit of knowing this change is coming, both internal and external dynamics, we wanted to know, how are our leaders getting mentally ready? How are they preparing to make the mindset shift that is necessary to lead in what will most definitely be a very different world? So we asked them about their mindset. And mindset's playing a really big role in the way we at Blessing White are looking at leadership. We're asking our leaders how they can, again, make that mental shift and be prepared not just to deploy the skills, but to bring the right attitudes to the work of leadership. We asked our leaders what mindset they needed to be successful in the future or to embrace the future, and here's what we heard. They prioritized adaptability, openness, and discipline. And I think this represents a really interesting balance between being open and nimble, but not being so loose that you fail to have a plan. In their prioritization of discipline and strategy, leaders are acknowledging that they need to understand what their goals are, how well resourced they are, the roles and responsibilities of those in their organization and on the teams they lead. However, they also recognize that the world is changing, and they need to adapt and be open to change. They can't be so wedded to the plan that they refuse to take into account new information, new entrants to their market, changing demographics, and reflect the impact of that new information in their plans. So be adaptable and be open. But remember, make sure you start from a place of discipline. And interestingly enough, that discipline element is what distinguished very successful organizations. They ranked it high on their list of priorities. And also, as a counter to that, unsuccessful companies, perhaps not surprisingly, ranked discipline as second to last. So with the benefit of knowing what impacts the different internal and external dynamics are going to have on leaders, and then knowing what mindset shift they wanted to make or will need to make to be ready for the future, we said, what skills do you need? Let's get back to that skill-based question and say, what skills do you need to be successful tomorrow? Here's what we heard, the 3 C's: communication, collaboration, and coaching, with both successful and very successful organizations ranking communication and coaching in a similar way. This prioritization did not surprise us, nor are these skills new. But what is new is the context in which leaders are deploying these skills. How a leader communicates, collaborates, and coaches looks very different from how they performed these same tasks 10 or 5 years ago. And we'll get to that in just a moment. But let's unpack for a moment that really big item of communication, because that can mean many things. And when we looked at the write-in responses, we saw a really wide spectrum of the type of communication support our leaders are looking for. For some, it was finding a way to communicate performance information. For others, it was about how to communicate in a way that motivated the team. Still others, particularly when you looked at the leader of leader responses, wanted to understand how they could communicate an inspiring vision. And still others said, I just need to know the words that I have to use to complete a performance evaluation. So regardless of the format, regardless of whether or not it was the right words on a performance review or how to communicate an inspiring vision, what they said is that their most important skill to be successful in the future is communication. And then second, collaboration. I think that goes a little bit back to some of what we said in the need for the senior leaders in the organization to work together well in that symphonic C-suite. I think it's also an acknowledgement that leaders are not working in a silo, nor are they leading a collection of individual contributors. They're leading teams. They're collaborating with others across the organization or the enterprise. And being able to do that well is paramount. And then last but not least, I think it's no surprise that coaching is an effective leadership tool to help develop your people, to help them discover the path to success that's right for them, to come up with innovative ideas. The power of coaching is something that we've studied as an organization and that is, at this point, pretty widely well known as a powerful leadership tool. And what our leaders are saying is, I still need this skill and I need help with it. I need help understanding how to do it in the moment, and I need some more basic help distinguishing coaching from mentoring and advice. So time and time again, communication, collaboration, coaching, we've heard it before, we're hearing it again, but they're deploying these skills in a very different context. And then last but not least, before we talk for a moment about what that context is and how it's changing, you'll see once again that dynamic playing out between successful and very successful organizations. Successful organizations are focused on driving team performance. How can I make sure I am accomplishing results and help me with the skills that I need to do that? Very successful organizations, a little more future focused. I need to develop and execute strategy. and those are the skills that will help me be successful. So the 3 C's: communication, collaboration, and coaching. But let's pause for a minute because, as I mentioned, communication is a key theme that emerged across the research. And you might push back and say, well, communication is not new. Leaders have always needed to be able to find the right words to provide feedback or to inspire. And that is true. But the context in which they are communicating is different. It's a much more digitally charged, hyper-connected environment. They need to be aware of being much more transparent. Information is readily available to customers and to employees through social media and other formats. So it behooves a leader to simplify their message and be transparent, because if they're not, they're way more easily found out through the many, many sources that enable their employees and their customers to get information. They need to be much more aware of how they manage their brand. There are some leaders that are doing this particularly well, using social media, Twitter, Instagram, even LinkedIn, to manage what is now a convergence of both personal leadership brand and company brand. So communication is changing. They need to be able to leverage social media. I talked about that just a couple of minutes ago when I referenced those social media platforms. They need to be able to use those platforms to listen at scale, to take in the massive amount of information and data that is coming their way, but then filter it. Because within that massive amount of information, there's a lot of noise. So the communication skill of filtering and then responding appropriately in these new digitally charged environments is so critical. And they need to be able to do this real time. They don't need to wait for a sanitized report to understand how their employees are feeling. They can get a pulse on a much more regular basis. And in turn, they need to be able to learn how to communicate equally as well on a real-time basis. So is communication a skill that they've needed for years? Absolutely. Is the environment in which they're changing in which they're communicating changing? Absolutely, 100%. And therein lies the challenge for L&D. So with that, let's pivot a little bit and talk about what are the implications of this research for those who support learning and development. Here's what we heard leaders said when we asked them where L&D can help. Again, no surprise based on the lead-in so far to this particular page. Communicating effectively, inspiring high performance, coaching, and driving accountability. They need to get individuals working well together, and then they need to be able to hold them responsible for those results, to hold them able. And that's really what driving accountability is all about. We then asked, how much do you believe your organization values leadership development? And I'll give you a minute to take a look at the possibilities and pause for a moment and think about how you would answer this question. And then I'll share with you what we heard from our leaders. So we asked them, how much do you believe your organization values leader development? And we asked them to also think about that in the context of the investment they make. Here's what we heard. 65% of leaders say their organization values leadership development and provides some or a meaningful investment. So it's easy to say it's valuable. It's another thing to back it up with the dollars. And we were really gratified to see organizations not only valuing, but also funding leadership development. We also wanted to know, where are those dollars best spent? So we asked them, who in your organization would benefit from training or professional development in order to best increase business impact? Give you a moment to answer that in your own mind, and then I'll tell you what we heard. What we heard is that frontline leaders remain the targeted level of investment for leadership development or professional development. And that's not of great surprise to us. Frontline leaders are responsible for leading 2/3 of the organization. They are working with the individuals on the front lines. They need to deliver those results that we've heard and seen throughout this presentation. So it comes as no surprise, perhaps, that their development and putting dollars behind giving them the skills that they need to lead others is paramount. We also wanted to know, what leadership development opportunities were most personally helpful if these leaders had access to them, and we gave them several options. What we learned is that the most helpful leadership experiences include human connection, mentoring, coaching, classroom interactions. All of these are high touch and high value. And in this, we saw very much a mirror to our Voice of the Learner survey that was conducted earlier this year. Our learners crave human interaction, human contact. They want to learn from others. They want to be coached by others. They want to interact with their colleagues in the classroom. I think the trick is going to be finding a way to scale that human connection, to not only be able to provide that in the classroom, but to also to provide human connection in a more digitally enabled learning platform. But whether you do it through coaching, one-to-one, or mentoring, or in an ILT, or even in a digitally enabled platform, the message is loud and clear. Find ways to help learners make that human connection with a trusted guide, a facilitator, a coach, or with their colleagues. And then finally, we wanted to get at a little bit of what was in the hearts of our leaders. How did they feel about being a leader? Is it something that they went into with trepidation? Are they excited about it? Are they cautious? What really is in their hearts when they consider their role as a leader? So we asked them, and here's what we found. The vast majority, as you can see by the percentages here, are extremely optimistic about their role as a leader. Words like energized, motivated, optimistic, and excited were chosen. In fact, when we added up the numbers, the positive feelings about leadership outweighed the negative by 2 to 1. This is really a bit of a double-edged sword, or a bit of a double-edged sword for our leaders, because they're both optimistic about leadership, excited to be developing others. When we asked them what made them most excited about their role, it was, in fact, that responsibility for helping individuals and teams to work well together and to develop. When we asked them what kept them up at night, the interesting thing was it was the same thing. Their responsibility to lead teams, to develop people, and to coach. So they love their role as leaders, they're feeling positive, and they're feeling optimistic, and they also recognize the great responsibility that comes with it. So with that, there's more information that we learned. I mentioned the demographic slices that we did and the additional supporting details based on the 1,400 leaders that we surveyed. If you're interested in reading the full report or in downloading some of those demographic research briefs, you can find that at the URL listed below. Thank you again for your time. We're excited to share with you what we learned from these leaders about not only what makes them successful today, but how we can better equip them to lead in the future.